Thanks so much, Peter. Always just I would do anything for you, as you know, and me discovering you was likewise a transformative experience for my life as well. And but to talk about embracing alienation and this, so the idea for the book, I guess maybe I thought that would maybe be an interesting place to start. So I Peter didn't mention this book on Hegel, but I've written on Hegel, and he's a really important philosopher, as you even would know from reading this book. And I there's a certain line from the preface to the Phenomenology of Spirit that always struck me, and it's this line that spirit, or the life of spirit, wins to its truth when it finds itself radically or absolutely torn asunder. And that idea of like, you find the truth about yourself when you're just in the like absolutely torn apart. Like that to me really spoke to me. And then the idea of alienation, and that idea of like and I like even just the etymology of the word, like the thing that's alien, that's foreign, is somehow also what's most proximate to us. And I think that's kind of what Hegel's getting at in that line. And that's what he's trying to, in fact, I think all of his philosophy is really about that. And then I'm also, as is evident from the book Embracing Alienation, I'm also very invested in psychoanalysis. And I think that's also an idea from psychoanalysis, that we find ourselves in what's alien to us when we encounter what seems like, it appears like it's the most strange from us. And so one thing I liked about the word alienation is and this works in English. I mean, I'm going to talk a little bit about German, but so in English, it's nice that there are this series of films, and there was just one last year, I think, called Alien, right? And Alien, Aliens, and all these different versions. And they're all about, and I think this is maybe a limitation of them, but they're all about the encounter with something that's absolutely monstrous. And the limitation, I think, of the film is that it's always external. And I thought, well, if you embrace alienation, that you see that monstrous alien as something actually internal to you. And I was just struck by how much that there's, even the way that we are drawn to, I'm not so drawn to them, but people are drawn to horror films. Part of that reason they're drawn to them is they're kind of drawn to that alienated, like that encounter with what's alien, that encounter with what's part of them, but they don't understand, or what's unconscious about themselves. And so that's, again, I see a kind of Hegelian psychoanalytic through line in that popular desire, whatever. So that idea became really important to me. And then I also liked there's two German terms that are used also to talk about alienation in both Hegel and in Marx. And one is Entäußerung, which means like coming out of yourself. And the other one is Entfremdung, which means encounter with what's fremd or foreign or strange. And so I like that idea that what's foreign or strange. We've seen how one of the real reasons for the success of right-wing populism around the world is this rejection of what's foreign or strange. But one of the things that I want to say is like the counter to that is this embrace of what's foreign and strange in ourselves, not necessarily, I'm not trying to make necessarily a political point, although ultimately the argument of the book is both political and personal, existential, psychic. So that's kind of the background for it. And then I was struck, I guess, by the way that the term alienation was constantly used pejoratively, that it was always, and we would say about teenagers here in the United States, like if the teenager's too alienated, that's a danger sign, a problem. You say about someone like, I'm alienated at my job. And of course, Marx's critique of capitalism is a critique of capitalist alienation. And so what was interesting to me was that in psychoanalysis and in Hegelian dialectics, alienation has a totally different valence, that it's a positive thing. And so it seemed to me like there had never been an attempt to fully, like Peter kind of said in his introduction to me, like that there hadn't really been a full way to think through that, the primacy of alienation, because even the leftists that had a Hegelian bent, like those of the Frankfurt School, like Theodor Adorno, Herbert Marcuse. I mean, Herbert Marcuse knew a ton about Hegel, as did Adorno, and they both wrote great books on Hegel, but they still have this, I think, Marxist prejudice that alienation is something that we should be trying to overcome. And I think for Hegel, not only should we not be trying to overcome it, but it's the attempt to, like, oppressive relations in the world are generated from the drive to overcome alienation. They aren't alienating it themselves, right? So I think that, like, just that, to me, that little flip of seeing things in that different way was the genesis for why I decided to write the book and to think about just to think about alienation sort of from the other side, like opposite of the way that it was usually considered. And then that link to that was, so in an earlier book I had written about a critique of identity politics, and I sort of see this Embracing Alienation as also a further critique of any attempt to find solace in a symbolic identity. And so I one of the things that I was really trying to do here was to, and I hope this, I mean, I think it obviously comes out, is that I was trying to pose subjectivity in opposition to symbolic identity. And so this, like, symbolic identity, one thing about it, whatever it is, like parent, career oriented, or religious identity, ethnic identity, national identity, any kind of identity, one of the reasons why it appeals to people is that it promises a stability and security and, again, this overcoming of alienation. But then subjectivity for me is this, what's constantly disrupting and getting under that that identity and making it impossible. So that's why I would say identity is always the promise of those things, but it never delivers on the promise because it's always being undermined by our alienated subjectivity. And so that idea of that subjectivity could be the point of actually taking, even not taking action, yes, but even like organizing a kind of structure, a collectivity, that maybe collective solidarity isn't around an identity, but instead is precisely around this uprooting, alienating structure, right? That's the thing that actually brings us together. And then that led me to what is I think the part of the book that I was most committed to, the final chapter, where I talk about this difference between the public sphere and community. And I for some reason, I can't even say, and I think one of the things I was trying to do in the book was to work out for myself why the word community always bothered me whenever anybody would say it, or whatever was applied to me, I hated it. Like they'd say, you're part of the community at the University of Vermont. And I would just it drove me crazy to hear someone say that. And so and any kind of community. And so I thought, was that just because I'm kind of like perverse and can't accept, maybe, but also like, or is it because I'm too like Ayn Rand individual? No, I don't think so. Like, I think that there was a kind of like recoil from precisely this way that community is posed as what allows us to overcome our alienation within, because a community for me is like on a collective scale, it functions in the same way as symbolic identity does on an individual scale. And then, so that final chapter was a way for me to kind of work through, like, why did that term bother me so much? And how could we think solidarity, collective solidarity, which I'm totally in favor of otherwise. And then what like clicked into shape for me was the idea that, okay, like the public sphere is so radically different from a community. And then the connection between, which I hadn't seen, maybe someone will say, oh, this is, other people have said this, like Jürgen Habermas, Nancy Fraser's already said this, but I hadn't seen anyone make the connection between alienated subjectivity and the public sphere. And so that to me was like, all of a sudden I was like, oh, okay, well, that kind of gives you a way to think about collective solidarity in opposition to community that doesn't rely on a community, this community, which always struck me. And this is why I think, and then as I was thinking about this is what bothered me about the term community, is that it always had this private tinge to it. In other words, like certain people are part of the community, but the community is constituted by those people that are out, right? And so that was always for me, like I've never heard of a community that said everybody, except the Christian community, but then I think that's maybe the wrong term to use about Christian community, because the whole point is that it's open. And when you hear people say Christian community who are Christian, I think typically they fall into this, like creating the enemy. And I was thinking of this great line by Kenneth Burke. He said, the famous scholar of rhetoric, who said, okay, I know you're a Christian, but what are you a Christian against? And I always thought, yeah, that's such a great point. But I mean, obviously the Christian idea is that you're not a Christian against anything. But I think often it gets betrayed and turned into this like Christian community that then is gated. And I say this in the book that I used to hear the term gated community. And I'm like, well, that's not really a community if it's gated. But then I realized, no, that was wrong. That actually every community is a gated community. The gated community is the synecdoche of the community. It's not the violation of the community. And so that really kind of all of a sudden, like everything kind of started to make sense for me. And then I realized too how uncomfortable I am in the public sphere, how that nicely fit into like so don't think that I'm championing something in the book that, it's just, you didn't like community, you like the public. And so no, I hate the public. I hate being out in public. But that's why I felt like, okay, you have like, I think in a certain way, maybe Peter will either challenge me or back me up on this, that every book is written against yourself, right? Like you're writing it, it's like you're writing to what your problem is and you're trying to get yourself out of it. And that's how that last chapter on the public sphere is really like it's an admonition to myself to like get out and encounter the public, because all the things that I say, like all the ways in which you're like, I think I say like you could be an anti-Semite on the bus and you're stuck sitting next to a Jew, right? Like you just can't, like the whole point of the public is you can't choose who you're seated next to. And that's why I think also this experience in the United States of the way the segregated bus worked was, this also I thought was really helped to make sense of that they basically communitized the public bus when they said you have to sit in the back, and what Rosa Parks did was say, no, this is a public bus. I'm going to occupy whatever seat I want because that's what it means to be in the public. That if you're white and racist, sorry, you have to sit by someone black. It's just that's the nature of the public, right? And so that was really important to me. And then I thought, I've always had this kind of this was a puzzle for me. Was these two films that I talk about, these films I'm sorry if you think this is too lowbrow, but this is my basic level of intellectual operation, the two Speed films. And so this first Speed film was an incredible success, and it really pushed the filmmaker Jan de Bont into the to the top of Hollywood, right? So before that, he was the DP, the director of photography on Die Hard and some really big Hollywood movies. And so Speed was his breakthrough, as his first film. And then he made Twister, another huge success. And then he made Speed 2, and it destroyed. Not only was it a bomb, such a bomb it destroyed. It was like Heaven's Gate for Michael Cimino. It destroyed his career. So he basically, if you look at his IMDb page, it's like Speed 2, stop. So I was like, why did that happen? Because it still has Sandra Bullock, and Jason Patric replaces Keanu Reeves. And if you've seen Keanu Reeves act, you're like, okay, replacing him is not going to destroy the film. He's fine, but it's not going to destroy the film. Right? So what was it? And then I thought, well, what it has to be is that the first film takes place on a public bus. And one of the things that you feel as a spectator is this incredible bond with the people on the bus and the danger that they're in. And then the second film takes place on a cruise ship. And this is really true. You're absolutely indifferent to the fate of you're like, okay, I hope they go down like Titanic. I don't even care. Right. So that to me, I was like, why is that? Why were the films so different? And then then I thought, oh, it's this public community thing, right? Like the people on the cruise ship, they constitute a little private community, and you can't, it's closed off to you as a spectator. Whereas on the public bus, it's a collective. You have solidarity with all those people on the bus. Even there's some people that are not really great, and you still feel solidarity with them, right? Like there says that one guy shoots the bus driver, another guy is like annoying and talks too much, but you still there's a kind of collective solidarity that forms with you as a spectator and them, I think. And I think that's the key to the film's I think it's a real like a action film masterpiece. But for me, that's the highest. It's like Citizen Kane, Speed, films. I think that's really that really again made this kind of thing click for me. And it was alienation that allowed me to understand this difference between public sphere and community. And that kind of ended up the fact that that's the last chapter of the book is not an accident. Like, that's where I felt like everything was headed, and it's what's important. It's what's important to me. And I think especially in our current political situation around the world, I think this kind of idea. I mean, one thing I liked about the idea was that it's both okay, a political kind of intervention, but it's also just about one's own existence too. And so for me, I maybe for other people too, but for me, that's what I was trying to write about. So that's what I would like to say. I really, really would love to hear any questions that people have.